The first thing I remember was the smell. Wet bark, fresh sap, hot engine oil, all of it packed into the cab so thick it felt like I was breathing through a soaked rag. My hands were locked on the wheel. The trailer behind me shuddered with a long metallic complaint, chains clinking once, then again, like something in the load had shifted and refused to settle. The road ahead was black except for what my headlights could carve out of it. That was when I saw him. He was standing in the middle of the lane like he'd been placed there, not waving, not stumbling, just waiting. The yellow center line ran straight to his boots. My chest seized and I hit the brakes hard enough to jar my shoulder. The pedal went down. The truck didn't slow, not enough. The air in the cab turned heavy and sour. I could hear my own breath, short and raw, and the soft rattle of the CB speaker waking up behind the dash. The man in the road lifted his face into the lights. He was already smiling, not startled, not afraid. Smiling like he'd known exactly where I'd be and exactly when I'd reach him. I remember the shine of his eyes. I remember the slick black road. I remember the way his head tilted just a little, the same way a person does when they're listening for something far away. Then the CB crackled. A voice came through the static, low and calm and close enough to feel against my ear. "You didn't stop last time either. I need to go back to the beginning." 2 years before that night, I could have driven those roads half asleep and still told you every turn by the feel of it through the steering column. That wasn't bragging. It was just what happens when a man spends enough nights hauling timber through the same Appalachian passes. The mountain teaches your body before your mind catches up. You learn where the shoulder drops away, where the fog likes to collect, where rain sits on the asphalt in skin-thin slicks, where a deer will freeze in your beams and where one will bolt. I knew the roads in McDowell County the way some men know the rooms in their own house, which is part of why I said yes when Rufus Pennington asked me to take the late haul. Rufus was the night foreman at our yard, a heavy man with a voice like gravel rolled in a bucket. He always smelled faintly of coffee that had burned hours ago and the cold tobacco he wasn't supposed to smoke in the office. That night the office was all damp paper, mud, and wet canvas, with the little floor heater clicking uselessly by the filing cabinet. Rain had moved through before sunset and left the whole place sweating. Even the walls looked damp. Rufus slid the route sheet across the desk and tapped the destination with one blunt finger. "Back run," he said. "Old County Hall Road through the ridge cut. Loader station staffed. You pick up there and bring it down before dawn." I looked at the sheet and gave a low whistle. That road's barely used. Still paved enough to count. By who? He snorted, which for Rufus was close to a laugh. By the same idiots who pay us. I folded the route sheet and tucked it into my shirt pocket. I wasn't thrilled about the road, but I wasn't worried either. It was a bad route in the way a lot of logging routes were bad. Narrow shoulders, long dark stretches, no houses, and no cell signal worth trusting. The kind of road where a mistake had plenty of room to become a story people told later. But it was still a road, asphalt, tires, freight, downhill money. I'd done worse. Then Rufus leaned back in his chair and jerked his thumb toward the corkboard by the door. "Read the notice before you go." I turned and saw a fresh white paper pinned over the old safety postings. The edges were still curling. Somebody had typed it in big clean letters. There were 5 lines on it. I read them once, then again, mostly because I wanted to make sure I wasn't missing the joke. "Do not stop your truck between mile markers 18 and 42. If you see someone on the road, do not make eye contact. If your CB radio calls your name, respond only once. Never drive faster than 35 miles per hour after midnight. And if you reach the same mile marker twice, turn off your engine and wait." I looked back at Rufus. "That's cute." He didn't smile. You telling me this is official company policy now? I'm telling you those are the rules for that road. Whose rules? Rufus rubbed a hand over his jaw. Outside, somewhere in the yard, a forklift backed up with a thin, whining beep that cut through the rainwater dripping off the eaves. You can call them what you want, he said. The boys on that run keep to them. And if I don't? He held my eyes for a moment longer than I liked. Then maybe nothing happens. That answer should have bothered me. Instead, it irritated me. Men in this line of work build superstitions the way old trucks build rust. One bad bend becomes cursed. One breakdown becomes a warning sign. One drunk sees headlights in the trees and suddenly every driver's got a ritual. I figured this was more of the same, some yard-born nonsense that had picked up weight because nobody wanted to admit they'd spooked themselves. I took the clipboard with the manifest and gave the paper one last glance. Do not make eye contact, I said. What am I supposed to do, drive blindfolded if some hitchhiker wanders out there? Don't stop, don't stare, keep moving. You believe this? Rufus looked past me toward the rain-striped window. For the first time his voice dropped. I believe men who've been driving mountains longer than you've been alive don't start following rules like that for fun. I shrugged like it didn't matter. I was good at that. Better than I had any right to be. Well, I said, even good thing I'm prettier than the last crew. That got a dry breath out of him, close enough to laughter to clear the air. He shoved the logbook toward me and told me to sign out. My pen scratched across the paper. Coulter Hayes Whitlock. I always wrote the whole thing. My father had insisted on it when I was young, said a man ought to sign his name like he wasn't ashamed to own it. There were nights after the crash when I stared at that same name on official statements and felt like it belonged to somebody else. I wasn't thinking about that then, not directly. But I remember my hand pausing just a fraction before I finished the last letter. Rufus noticed. He noticed most things. You good to drive? He asked. The question was casual, almost lazy, but it still landed wrong in my stomach. I capped the pen and slid it back. I've been doing this since I was 22. That ain't what I asked. I'm fine. He watched me a beat longer, then stood with a grunt and reached for his rain jacket. Truck's loaded light for the climb. You top off at the pump, then head to the station. Calder's up there tonight, too. You and Calder? Rufus nodded. That actually made me feel better. Ewan was steady, quiet but steady. Younger than me by a few years, narrow in the shoulders, always neat even in yard mud, like he couldn't quite break the habit of caring how he looked. He hadn't been on timber long enough to pick up most of the nonsense the older drivers carried around. If he was working the route, that meant it was still a real job, not a ghost story. Rufus headed for the door, then stopped with his hand on the knob. Coulter? Yeah. If the radio says your name, don't get smart with it. I laughed. I actually laughed. Then I walked out into the yard under the dripping floodlights, smelling diesel, wet bark, and cut pine, and I remember thinking that if a mountain wanted to scare me, it ought to try harder than a typed list on a corkboard. Looking back, that was the last part of the night where I still sounded like myself. The truck was already idling when I climbed in. The seat had the same split in the vinyl near the right hip where stuffing poked through. The steering wheel was tacky with old wear and cold damp. I always liked that first minute alone in the cab, before a run settled into your bones. Just the hum of the engine, the dash glow, the smell of the load behind you. Work reduced to noise and weight. I pulled out of the yard a little after 11, each with rainwater still dripping off the mirrors and the hills around the valley swallowed in cloud. By the time I took the county road up toward the loading station, midnight was coming on. The road narrowed, the houses thinned, porch lights disappeared one by one until the only light left was mine. I remember thinking the rules had done one thing right. They'd made me pay attention. The loading station sat in a clearing hacked out of the woods, all mud, floodlights, and heavy equipment sleeping in angles. The place smelled like wet earth torn open. Even with the lights up, the darkness around it looked close enough to touch. There was a generator thumping somewhere near the scales, and every now and then I could hear the metal tick of cooling machinery. Ewan Calder was standing under the awning by the office trailer when I rolled in, and he had his jacket zipped to the throat and a knit cap pulled low, hands in his pockets, watching my truck come through the gate. The loader operator gave me a wave from inside the cab of the machine, but Ewan didn't. He just waited until I killed the engine and stepped down. "Thought Rufus might send you," he said. The humidity hit me the moment I left the cab. It was warm in the wrong way, slick and choking, carrying the smell of bark mulch and standing water. My boots sank at the edge of the gravel. "You look thrilled to see me," I said. Ewan's mouth twitched, but it didn't quite become a smile. "You read the rules?" I laughed again, though softer this time. "Everybody's real committed to the bit tonight." His eyes flicked to the road beyond the station, black between the tree trunks. "It ain't a bit." That was the first thing about him that felt off. Not fear exactly. More like discipline. The kind that gets built after fear's already done its work and left something behind. I leaned against the fender and took a sip from the thermos I'd brought. The coffee had gone bitter. "So what, you boys started a little mountain club and forgot to invite me?" Ewan ignored that. "Rule 1 matters most," he said. "Once you pass 18, you don't stop till you're clear of 42, not for anything. 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 You hear yourself." He looked at me then. Really looked. Rain dripped from the awning between us in a steady, hollow tapping sound. You ever get halfway through a sentence and realize you're hearing your own voice from somewhere else? I let out a breath through my nose. No. You ever see headlights behind you where there isn't room for another vehicle? No. You ever pass the same marker twice without turning around? I shrugged. Bad signage. Ewan's jaw worked once. There was a loader chain hanging from a rack near the trailer, and the wind, if there was wind, wasn't strong enough to move it. Still, I heard a faint clink from somewhere behind us. Then another. Ewan noticed me listening. He lowered his voice. "When it speaks to you, answer once, no more than once." "When what speaks to me?" His face tightened. "You'll understand when it does." The operator called out that my load was ready, and for a second the normal noise of work came rushing back in. Hydraulics whining, reverse beeper, the slap of mud under tires. I remember being grateful for it, and grateful enough that I almost told Ewan to get some sleep and quit spooking himself. Instead, I just said, "Did something happen to you out there?" He didn't answer right away. He looked over my shoulder at my truck, at the cab windows reflecting the station lights. Finally, he said, "Not the first night." That line sat between us, damp and cold. I should have pushed harder. I know that now. But in the moment, his seriousness made me pull the other direction. Pride does that. If another man's frightened, and you've spent years making sure nobody ever sees you frightened, you start performing competence like it's a duty. So I clapped him on the arm and said, "Well, if the woods call my name, I'll try not to flirt back." His expression didn't change. "Don't look at anyone standing on the road," he said, "and don't do it even if they look hurt." The loader swung the timber bundle into place on my trailer. The whole truck rocked with the weight, fresh-cut logs, heavy and wet, strapped down with chains that smelled of rust and sap. The sound of them settling traveled through the frame and up into my boots. I signed the station sheet. Ewan signed his. When I wrote my name, I caught him glance at it. "Hayes," he said quietly. I looked up. "What?" "You always sign the full name." My mother liked it. He nodded as if that answered something. Then he stepped closer, close enough that I could smell cold rain and the detergent on his jacket under the mud and bark stink of the station. "If the radio says your whole name," he said, "you don't answer twice, even if it sounds like somebody you know." Something in the way he said somebody made my fingers go numb for a second. I covered it with a shrug. "You got family up these roads or something?" His face turned strange then. Not guilty, not exactly. More like he'd heard a word he wasn't ready for. "No," he said, "not anymore." That was the last normal conversation I had that night. We rolled out within minutes of each other, him first, me behind by enough distance to keep our lights from interfering. The station vanished behind the curve. Then it was just my engine, the rain drying off the hot hood in a faint hiss, and the black line of road carrying me into the ridge. The first miles were easy, narrow but easy. My beams cut through low-hanging mist and found wet leaves shining at the shoulder. Rock wall on one side, and drop on the other, nothing new. Nothing supernatural, just mountain road and midnight. I kept the speed sensible more out of habit than obedience. The truck had a loaded sway to it, and the asphalt still held a little damp. The sign for mile marker 18 appeared in my headlights and slipped by. I remember actually grinning to myself. There, I thought. Now the haunted stretch begins. I wish I could say some part of me knew better. It didn't. Around mile 23, I saw something dark lying near the center line ahead. Not a person, not at first glance. More like a blown tire or maybe a chunk of bark that had fallen off somebody's load. The shape wasn't right, though. Too low, too long. The kind of road debris that can rip a line or throw a trailer if you hit it wrong. So I did what any driver with sense would have done. I eased off the throttle. Not much. Just enough to bring the truck down to let the headlights settle onto it so I could judge whether I needed to straddle it or ride the shoulder a hair. That was the first rule broken. Nothing happened. No voice, no shadow, no hand reaching out of the trees. The cab stayed warm with the engine hum. The wipers hissed once across a fine film of damp. Ahead of me, the dark shape resolved into a patch of shredded tarp mashed flat against the road. I snorted to myself and brought the speed back up. "That it," I said aloud to nobody. "That's the mountain's big trick." The only answer was the rattle of the trailer behind me. Then the chains clinked. Not the heavy jolt of a load shifting from a bump. Not the normal metallic settling after a turn. This was lighter, deliberate almost. One short drag, then another, heard as if someone had laid a hand on the load and tugged. I checked the mirrors. Nothing but the wet shine of logs, the dark lane behind me, and the faint thread of mist in my taillights. The clink came again. I told myself it was tension equalizing. Timber swells with moisture, straps flex, metal talks. Anybody in the profession knows that. But I couldn't shake how wrong the timing felt. The road was smooth there, no pothole, no swerve, no reason for movement. I listened for it to happen again. It didn't. After a minute, I laughed under my breath. Ewan's voice was still hanging around in my head, and I was annoyed to find that it had any room there at all. That was the trick with superstition. You didn't have to believe it for it to start shaping how you heard a noise in the dark. I rolled on. The humidity kept building the farther I climbed, and the vents pushed out air that felt chewed and breathed already, warm and damp with the smell of wet bark packed around me. My shirt was sticking between my shoulders. Even the steering wheel felt slick. Outside, the night had gone unnaturally still. No insects at the windows, no rustle in the trees, just engine noise and tires, and once in a while a far-off metallic echo like chain links touching somewhere outside the range of the headlights. That should have been impossible. When a truck stops, sound changes with it. Space comes back. Distance makes sense again, but every time I slowed for a curve, I heard those chains faintly, as if another load somewhere in the dark was moving when mine wasn't. I passed mile 27 and thought about the rule sheet just long enough to roll my eyes. Then the CB clicked alive, just the soft electrical pop at first. No voice, a breath of static. I glanced at it, mostly irritated, expecting some other driver bleeding over onto the channel. I reached to lower the volume, then left it alone. If Ewan or station crew needed something, I didn't want to miss it. The speaker hissed once, then went quiet. My own reflection in the windshield looked pale and stretched over the dark glass. For a second, with the road bending and the dash light low, I thought of another windshield, another night, another bend in another pass. My hands tightened. I pushed the memory away before it could finish forming. The official story had long since set like concrete. Brake issue on wet grade. No way to avoid drift. Smaller vehicle lost control and went over. Tragic accident. Statement filed. Case closed. That was what lived on paper. Out on mountain roads after midnight, paper doesn't feel like much. Still, nothing had happened. Not really. I was driving. The truck was sound. The road was road. Somewhere ahead was the yard, a dawn shift, and men who'd laugh when I told them the haunted route had tried to kill me with a tarp scrap and a noisy chain. I actually pictured myself telling it over coffee. That's what false security feels like, if you want to know. Not relief, confidence. The easy kind. The kind that makes you lean back a little and stop counting the ways a night can go bad. Because I wasn't scared yet. Not until the radio said my name. The speaker cracked hard enough to make me flinch. Static flooded the cab, bright and grainy, followed by a single click like someone keying a microphone with a steady hand. Then a voice came through, low under the engine noise. Coulter? I frowned and picked up the handset. Yeah. It was automatic, casual, the same answer I'd given on 100 runs. Silence followed. Not radio silence exactly. I could hear the channel breathing, a faint rush as if the other end had weather on it. Then the voice came back. You were drinking coffee that night too. Every muscle in my back locked at once. My hand stayed on the mic, but my thumb eased off the button. For a second, all I heard was the truck, the wet roll of tires, my own pulse in my ears. Then I said, "Who's this?" No answer. I looked at the CB display like it might tell me something useful. Dead ordinary. Channel set right. Signal light flickering weak. The cab smelled suddenly stronger, like the sap in the logs had heated up all at once. "Rufus," I said, trying to keep my tone flat. "If that's you, you can knock it off." Static, then a soft sound that might have been a laugh if it had come from a human throat. You spilled it when you hit the guardrail. The road narrowed through a cut in the rock. My headlights washed over wet stone, then the white post of the shoulder marker. I realized my foot had eased off the throttle. The truck was slowing again. I brought it back up on instinct. Nobody knew that detail. Not officially. Not the coffee. Not the way the cup had tipped and burst against the dash when the truck lurched. I had cleaned what I could before the first deputy reached the scene. What was left looked like mud and soda and everything else a wreck leaves behind. It hadn't made it into the report because I hadn't mentioned it and nobody asked. The voice on the CB had no right to know. I swallowed and pressed the mic. "What do you want?" Static, then clearer now, almost conversational. "You looked at me in the mirror before I went over." My skin went cold so fast it felt like falling into deep water. I hadn't told that either. The other vehicle had come up faster than I expected on the pass 2 years earlier, caught in my mirror lights. Too close and too small and wrong place, wrong time. I remembered a pale oval of a face in the side mirror, a flash of eyes, then my truck drifting wide and the impossible shrinking space left on the road. I remembered the other headlights jerking, the guardrail, the sound after. I had spent 2 years teaching myself to remember that sequence without the face attached to it. Now the radio had put it back. "I don't know who this is," I said, and my voice didn't sound like mine anymore. But you better pray I never find out." This time the laugh was unmistakable. Not loud, not wild, just close, familiar in a way I couldn't place yet, which was somehow worse than if I'd known it immediately. The channel snapped dead. I kept driving. That's the part people think they'd get wrong when they imagine a story like this. They think fear would make you stop, ask questions, turn around. But professional habit is stronger than panic in the first minute, stronger by far. Your body keeps doing the job while your mind scrambles to name what it's hearing. So I kept it between the lines, checked mirrors, watched the gauges, told myself there were explanations. Ewan playing a trick, though how he'd know details from a sealed report I couldn't say. Rufus digging through old paperwork, learning enough to bait me, and though he'd never been the kind of man to make jokes that careful. Somebody from the sheriff's office. Some local with a scanner and bad taste, all weak explanations, all better than the truth trying to form underneath them. I looked at the mile marker sliding past in my beams. 29. The road ahead dipped through a stand of hemlock so dense the dark under them looked solid. My throat had gone dry despite the heavy air. I reached for the thermos, thought better of it, and put my hand back on the wheel. I know now what that voice was doing, I tell myself sometimes. It wasn't trying to scare me first, it was trying to get close. A few bends later, I saw the figure. At first it was just a paler shape where the right shoulder widened into a little washout. Somebody standing near the edge of the road. Thin. Still. I'm too close to the lane. Every instinct I had as a driver keyed on it at once. Human body near blacktop. Assess, adjust, avoid. I should have kept my eyes on the center line. Instead, I looked. It wasn't a quick glance either. It was a full instinctive check, the kind you make when you think you might be about to kill someone if you judge wrong. My headlights swept across the figure and found a face turned toward me. A man's face. He wasn't waving for help. He wasn't hurt. He was simply watching my truck pass with a smile too small to be friendly. Not wide, just knowing. The sort of smile somebody gives when you arrive late to a meeting they'd planned around you. For half a second I thought he was the same man from the cold open, but that isn't quite true. It was more like my mind recognized him before my eyes did. A tilt of the head, and the set of the mouth, something unfinished in the features, as if they were still moving toward the face they were supposed to become. Then I was past him. I sucked in a breath so hard it hurt. Rule 2, broken clean. The mirror showed only darkness at first. Then for one flicker of reflected light, I saw tire tracks in the damp shoulder running alongside mine. Fresh tracks. Not from before. Not old impressions. New. A second set, narrow and sharp, keeping pace with the truck where there was no room for another vehicle between the drop and the lane. I blinked, and they were gone. My hands tightened on the wheel until the joints ached. I told myself the shoulder had preserved older marks. I told myself my angle made them look closer than they were. I told myself anything that kept the next thought from locking into place. The CB clicked, and I didn't touch it. "Did you see me that time?" the voice asked. I stared at the road. The voice was better now, cleaner. It had lost some of the radio grit. I could hear age in it, a man's steady middle years, maybe a little tired, maybe amused. There was something local in the shape of the words, too. A mountain softness that brushed against my memory and made it stir. No answer from me. Didn't take you long to look. I kept my eyes fixed ahead. "I said answer once," the voice went on, and suddenly it didn't sound like the dead driver anymore. It sounded like Ewan Calder, low and flat, repeating the warning by the loading station. Then it changed again before the sentence ended, slipping back into the other man's tone so neatly it made the hair lift along my arms. But you never were good at stopping at one chance." The truck lurched slightly as the road crossed a patched seam. Behind me, the chains gave a single bright clatter, then fell silent. I was breathing too shallow. I forced myself to take in air, heavy and damp as bath steam, and let it out slow. Think. That's what I kept telling myself. Think like a driver. Think like a man alone on a mountain road who wants to get home. I had rules even if I thought they were nonsense. Rules meant procedure. Procedure meant control. Don't stop between 18 and 42. Don't make eye contact. Respond only once. Don't go over 35 after midnight. If you see the same marker twice, turn off the engine and wait. Too late for some of that. Not too late for the rest. So I checked my speed. 32. Good. I kept it there. And the road wound left around a cut bank slick with runoff. For a second, in the sweep of the headlights, I thought I saw somebody standing farther up between two trees. Then it was only bark and shadow again. My shirt clung cold now. The humidity had turned from summer heavy to suffocating, as if the cab were losing air faster than the vents could replace it. I passed mile marker 27. I know what you're thinking. You heard it already a few minutes earlier in the story. So did I, though not in the same way. My mind did a stupid little hitch, like it had misread the number in the dark. Then I looked in the mirror, half expecting to see some side road I'd taken without noticing. Some turnaround, some explanation built out of asphalt and fatigue. There was nothing behind me but the same black ribbon, same trees, same wet shine. And I should have killed the engine right there. I didn't. Pride again. Anger, too. I was done being toyed with, whether by a person, a prank, or something I didn't want to name. The road curled on. The marker slipped behind. I told myself I'd misread the earlier one. 27 and 37, maybe. A trick of reflection, fatigue, stress. The kind of lies a man tells himself always sound most convincing right before they cost him. By the time I reached the next bend, the trees on either side had become too similar. At first, I only noticed it because a split-trunk sycamore on the left looked familiar, then a white scar on a pine, then a low-leaning rock with a patch of silver lichen shaped like a handprint. Each of them slid past the windows with the faint wrongness of seeing the same face twice in a crowd. My tongue felt numb. And the road wasn't just repeating in my head, it was repeating outside the glass. I kept driving. That choice became the center of everything after. The road should have descended by then. I knew the grade, knew where the shoulder widened near an old runoff ditch, knew where the county maintenance sign leaned backward from a busted post. None of it appeared. Instead, the lane unspooled ahead at the same shallow rise, same hemlock walls, same wet skin of asphalt. My headlights found mile marker 27 again. This time there was no mistaking it. The reflector on the top edge was chipped in the same place. The post leaned the same slight angle toward the ditch. A clump of weeds hugged the base like a crooked green fist. I had passed it already. I knew I had. The truck cab shrank around me. My first urge was to gun it. Pure animal refusal, and get out faster, outrun the trick, force the world to behave through speed and horsepower. But Rule 4 rose up in my head before my foot could do it. Never faster than 35 after midnight. I don't know whether the rules were there to save me or to train me. That's one of the questions that still hasn't settled. I held the truck at 34 and the engine groaned low with resentment. The CB came alive again, and before the voice said anything, before a single word reached me, I knew it would use my full name. Coulter Hayes Whitlock. I felt that in my teeth. Nobody on the crew used all three names. Not Rufus, not Ewan. My mother used to when I was small, and she'd caught me lying before I had sense enough to do it well. The investigators had used it too. They'd reading from forms and statements while I kept my palms flat on interview tables so nobody would see them shake. The radio voice said it like it belonged in its mouth. I didn't answer. "You weren't asleep long," it said, "just long enough." My vision narrowed, not from fainting, from memory. There are moments your body stores even after your mind files them away. The brief downward dip of the chin. The way lane reflectors blur when your eyes lose them for half a second. The sensation of waking already in motion and not understanding why your hands are correcting so hard. I had spent 2 years trimming that memory down to something survivable, sanding away the ugliest pieces until it fit inside the phrase, accident. The voice kept speaking, and I hit the rail twice before it gave. I jerked the handset off its cradle so hard the cord snapped taut. "Shut up." My own words came out raw, the first real crack in my control. The speaker hissed, then answered in my voice. "Shut up." Not an imitation from a bad prank, not a distorted replay. My voice exactly, with the same strain under it, the same breath on the consonants. Then it shifted again. "That's what you said after." The road bent right. I followed it. The same split sycamore passed on the left. Same scarred pine. The world had become a record groove, and my truck was the needle trapped inside it. Ahead, in the wash of the headlights, another pair of taillights appeared. I almost cried out from relief. A truck, boxy silhouette, high trailer, wet, just stopped on the shoulder half ahead in a turnout where the road widened by a stand of stripped poplar. Hazard lights dead. Cab dark, but it was a truck, something real, something with bolts and steel and a license plate, something human. Ewan's rig. I knew it from the dent in the left mudflap bracket and the faded sticker on the back of the cab window. I had seen both at the station. My relief died so fast it made me dizzy. Rule 1 said don't stop between 18 and 42. I was still inside the stretch. I had to be. But Ewan's truck was there, abandoned, quiet. Real enough that I could smell hot rubber and cooling metal as I rolled closer. One of his trailer chains hung loose and tapped the frame softly in the thick air. I passed him by 20 feet. Then the cab light inside his truck flicked on. No hand visible. No body in the seat. Just the weak yellow dome light blooming in the empty cab like somebody had opened a door I couldn't see. I hit my brakes before I made the decision to do it. The truck slowed. Rule 1 broken for real this time. I pulled onto the shoulder and stopped with my engine idling low. For a moment neither truck moved, neither cab showed anyone living in it, and all I could hear was the tick of cooling metal and the distant, impossible clink of chains from deeper in the woods. The humidity outside pressed against the glass like wet cloth. "Ewan," I called through the closed window because apparently some part of me still believed names worked the way they were supposed to. No answer. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped down. The air outside felt used, too warm, too wet. It slid into my lungs without cooling them, and gravel crunched under my boots. The smell of bark was stronger here, mixed with something stale underneath, like water trapped too long in a ditch. Ewan's truck door was open. That was the first thing I saw when I came around the front. Open wide, swaying slightly though there was no wind. Inside, the dash glow washed the empty seat in blue-green light. The CB radio on his dash was alive, not crackling, talking. My voice came out of it. "Keep moving," it said. Then, after a beat, in the exact same tone I used when checking my straps at a stop. "Load looks fine," then quieter. "I didn't mean to." I stopped dead. The voice repeated, "I didn't mean to." It was me, perfectly me, not just sound, habit. The little drop at the end of a sentence when I'm tired. The breath before the word mean. I felt the back of my neck go cold. "Ewan." I said again, softer now. Something moved beyond the trees. I swung the flashlight toward the sound, beam shaking despite myself. Wet trunks flashed white, leaves glittered. Brush trembled once, then settled. And there he was. Ewan stepped out from behind a tree about 20 yards off the shoulder. He didn't look injured. That somehow made it worse. His cap was gone and his hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat, but his clothes were intact, his face calm, almost peaceful. He lifted one hand and gave a small, casual wave toward the empty road beyond me. Then he spoke to it. "Not yet," he said. His voice was gentle, patient, like he was answering somebody upset. I turned, flashlight slicing across the lane. There was nothing there. When I looked back at Ewan, he was still facing that same empty stretch of road, a head cocked slightly, listening. Then he nodded once to whatever he heard and lowered his hand. "Ewan," I snapped. "Who are you talking to?" His eyes shifted to me at last. For 1 second I thought he didn't recognize me. Then he smiled, tired and sad and terribly relieved. "It likes you better," he said. The woods around us gave back a faint chain sound, farther off now, moving. I took a step toward him. "Get in the truck." He looked past me at my cab, at the dark windshield reflecting my own lights. "You answered too easy," he said. "I did too, first night." "What are you hearing?" He wet his lips. His gaze moved to my face and stayed there in a way that made me feel seen and measured both at once. "The man from the pass," he said. All the warmth left my limbs. I don't remember lifting the flashlight, Ewan, but suddenly the beam was in his eyes. He winced and raised an arm. "What did you say?" "The man from the pass." He blinked against the light. "The one they said died when his car went over. That's who talks first. After that, it learns whatever you give it." My mouth had gone so dry I could barely swallow. "How do you know about that?" He lowered his arm slowly. "Because it told me." That answer hit harder than if he'd accused me outright. "What did it tell you?" His voice changed then. Not in sound, in weight. It took on the exhausted patience of somebody repeating a hard truth to a child. "It said you lied." The radio in his cab laughed in my voice. I backed away from it. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Maybe not," Ewan said. "Maybe it lies. Maybe that's all it does, but it knew your route before you got assigned it. You knew your full name before you signed in. Knew you'd come if Rufus asked." I stared at him. "You told Rufus." "No. You told somebody." He shook his head, and now there was fear in him again, real fear surfacing under the calm. "I didn't tell anybody, that's the point." The wood snapped with a branch somewhere uphill, not close, not far enough. Ewan's eyes went to the sound and then back to me. "You need to choose before it closes the loop." I almost laughed at that because it was such an insane sentence, and because if I laughed maybe the rest of it wouldn't be real either. Choose what? Whether you're stopping for him or driving through him. The radio in his truck answered in the dead man's voice before Ewan could. "He didn't stop last time. That broke the moment open. I ran back to my cab, not brave, not noble, just fast. In gravel spraying under my boots, flashlight banging against my thigh, lungs burning on air that wouldn't thin out. Behind me I heard Ewan call something, but I couldn't make out the words over the sudden clamor of chains. Not one truck's chains, many. Or one sound echoing from too many directions. I hauled myself into the cab, slammed the door, locked it, and jammed the truck into gear with hands that had started to tremble in earnest. I looked once toward Ewan's truck as I pulled out. The dome light was off. The CB in his cab was still speaking, but all I could hear through the glass was the rhythm of it. Ewan himself was gone. The road took me again before I could decide whether that was a mercy. After that, the night stopped pretending it might let me reason my way out. The trees no longer passed like trees. They repeated in patterns, each bend echoing the last with only tiny changes, a branch lower here, a washout deeper there, as if the road were studying itself while I drove through it. My headlights kept finding details I'd already seen and then punishing me for recognizing them. The split sycamore, the rock with silver lichen, the marker post leaning into the ditch. 27, then 27 again, though not always where it should have been. The CB voice grew steadier, more intimate, less like a transmission and more like a man sitting in the passenger seat turned slightly toward me in the dark. Your hands are slipping. I tightened them. You check the mirror before every curve now. I stopped checking for a whole mile because it said that. Then it laughed softly when I couldn't help myself and looked again. I remember your truck, it said, in green stripe on the side, coffee ring by the cup holder, St. Christopher on the dash. I looked down before I could stop it. The Saint medallion was gone. I hadn't kept it after the crash. It had flown off somewhere in the cab and I never looked for it. Yet for one blink of time, with the dash lights low and my pulse drumming in my neck, I thought I saw the outline of it hanging there, swinging gently from a hook that didn't exist. When I lifted my eyes, someone was standing on the right shoulder ahead. I didn't look directly this time. I saw him in the edge of my vision, a vertical wrongness beside the trees, and kept my eyes on the lane markers as I passed. But not looking at a thing isn't the same as not knowing it's there. I could feel the shape of him through the glass, feel the attention in it, fixed and smiling, and the voice on the radio had become perfect by then. Not just the dead man's tone, his timing, his breath, even the little pause before certain words, as if he were choosing them with care. "Do you know why I remember your face?" it asked. I said nothing. "Because you looked relieved when it wasn't your truck going over." That hit so hard I nearly swerved. It's a terrible thing hearing your worst thoughts spoken aloud by something that can't possibly know it. But worse still is hearing it and knowing at some hidden level that once, in the ugliest fraction of a second, it was true. I had felt horror, shock, and mixed in with it, somewhere small and venomous, relief that I was still on the road. That was the part I'd buried deepest. No report had held it, no interview had touched it. I'd never said it aloud because saying it would have made the accident into something more like a sin. And I'd already done enough to survive myself. "That's not what happened," I said, though my voice was thin. "Then tell it right." I didn't, because telling it right meant beginning before the drift, before the guardrail, before the weather. It meant starting with the truth that I had been tired for an hour and knew it, that I had cracked the window, turned the radio up, slapped my own cheek at a stoplight in town, and still kept going because the load needed moving and I had driven that pass so many times, I thought routine could carry me farther than wakefulness. It meant admitting I had earned every inch of guilt that came after. The road narrowed until the tree branches met overhead in the headlights like ribs. The voice went on, almost kindly now. Ewan stopped. That's why he's still listening. My mouth tightened. "What did you do to him?" "What did you do to me?" I punched the CB off. Silence slammed into the cab so hard it felt physical. For maybe 10 seconds I had only the engine, the tires, the wet breathing of the vents. My own mind rushed to fill the gap, and that was almost worse. Without the voice there, I heard memory more clearly. Metal screaming, my own breath cursing. The hollow final sound from below the guardrail. Then the CB turned itself back on, not with a crackle, with my own voice. "Coulter Hayes Whitlock." I made a sound I don't think I'd ever made before, low and involuntary, the kind that comes out when language gives up. The speaker continued. "You're going to slow at the next bend." I shook my head once, furious. I'm not. Yes, you are. And the road drops away on the left and you'll think you see brake lights below. The bend came. I kept my foot steady. 33, 34. Then red glimmered down through the trees to my left. I slammed off the throttle before I even registered doing it. The truck eased down, exactly as the voice had said. There, it murmured. You still follow me. The red lights below vanished. There had been nothing there. Or if there had, it wasn't any vehicle waiting to be found. That's when I understood the shape of the trap. It wasn't only haunting the road, it was learning me. Each fear I confirmed became another handle it could use. Every glance, every answer, every denial, another piece fitted into whatever face it was building. The moral choice, when it came, wasn't dramatic. No lightning, no grand speech. In just one long stretch of road opening ahead, and the knowledge settling into me that continuing like this might mean circling until morning, or until the truck ran dry, or until I lost the ability to tell whether any of it had ever ended. Stop and face it, and I might be giving it exactly what it wanted. Keep driving, and I might repeat the crash forever. There isn't a good option inside a loop. That's what makes it a loop. The road widened suddenly onto a straightaway, and for the first time in what felt like hours, I could see far ahead. Mist clung low over the asphalt. The center line shone. The trees stood back a little from the shoulder. And there, dead in the middle of the lane, was a man beside a smaller vehicle angled against a broken guardrail. The scene was so exact my body recognized it before my mind did. The old pass, and the turn, the position of the car, one headlight out, steam or fog or something pale rising from the crumpled front, the sour metallic smell that follows a fresh impact. Even the angle of the guardrail, bent outward where metal had given. I wasn't on that road. I knew I wasn't, but the cab had filled with that same cold that comes after adrenaline, and the back of my tongue tasted pennies. My foot hovered over the brake. The man in the lane lifted his head. It was him now, fully him, not almost, not becoming. The face from my side mirror 2 years ago, completed and close enough to see the rain-dark hair plastered to his forehead, the bloodless calm in his expression, the little crease beside one eye. A middle-aged man in a county work jacket, one hand resting on the roof of the ruined car as if he'd only stopped to ask directions. And he was smiling at me the same way. The CB whispered, "Stop." I started to cry then, though quietly. Not from fear alone, from recognition, from the obscene intimacy of it. The thing out there had reached into the one sealed room in me and rebuilt it with props and weather and posture until I couldn't tell where memory ended and punishment began. "Tell me your name," I said to him, to the road. He didn't move his mouth, but the radio answered. "Tell me the truth first." My truck rolled closer. I could go around him maybe. The shoulder looked narrow. The bent rail left little space. If I tried to force past, I might jackknife, or I might hit him, or there might be nothing there at all except the need to make me choose. Stop and confront it. Keep driving and risk becoming the man who didn't stop again. Both choices tasted the same in my mouth by then. I remember the sticky feel of the wheel, the suffocating air, the clink of chains behind me, slow and patient, as if the load itself had started breathing. I remember whispering I was asleep, like testing whether the cab would allow the words. The figure's smile faded. "I know," the radio said. Not cruel, not triumphant, just certain. And that certainty broke something open in me I had spent 2 years bracing shut. "I was asleep," I said louder. "It wasn't the brakes, I lied." The truck kept rolling. The man in the lane took one step closer. I could see his face now with terrible clarity, and what undid me wasn't rage in it. It was familiarity. I knew him, not from the crash report which had kept him a line item and a surname, I knew him from before. From a gas station off Route 52 maybe a week before the wreck, when he'd helped me hold a side compartment door closed with a bungee after a hinge pin snapped. We had stood under buzzing lights in light rain, hands blackened with road grit, and he'd joked that mountain roads collected men like us because flatter country knew better. I had forgotten him, or buried him with everything else. That was the answer to the first question, I think. Who was really on the road that night? Not a stranger, a man I had spoken to. A man whose voice had once lived in a real body under bad fluorescent light while I laughed and thanked him and promised I'd buy the next coffee if our routes crossed again. The mimic had not invented that intimacy, it had used it. The tears on my face felt cold in the hot cab. I made my choice. I braked, hard, and the load surged behind me. Chains snapped taut with a cracking chorus. The truck shuddered but held straight. My body lurched against the belt. The smaller vehicle in my headlights seemed to ripple like an image on disturbed water. But the man stayed where he was, one hand at his side, waiting. The truck stopped. For the first time since mile 18, maybe for the first time since I answered the radio, real stillness entered the cab. No road movement, no turn. Just the idle throb of the engine and my own ragged breathing. The man stepped toward the grill until he stood just beyond the brightest wash of the headlights. Then he spoke without the radio. His voice came through the glass as clear as if the window were down. You know me now. I couldn't feel my hands. Yeah, I said. The smile didn't come back. Neither did anger. He looked tired. So tired. Then look at me. I did. His face didn't split, didn't rot, didn't become monstrous. It stayed ordinary, human. Worse for that. Rain damp on the hair, road grime on the collar, eyes that seemed deeper set than I remembered. In them I saw no mercy, but no simple hatred either. Only insistence. I didn't mean for you to die, I said. He nodded once, and in that movement I saw the exact tilt I'd glimpsed in the mirror before the fall. I know. The false hope that answer gave me was almost enough to kill me, because for one blinding second I thought that was it. Confession offered, debt named, road satisfied, the night ready to let me pass. Then he said, "But you still left me there." Everything in me shrank from that. The investigators had found the car at first light. I had not gone down the embankment. I had not climbed the rail. I had called it in from the turnout ahead once my hands stopped shaking enough to hold the phone. Told myself there was nothing I could have done in the dark, in the weather, on that slope. Maybe that was even partly true. Partly true is the ugliest kind. I opened my mouth and no words came. Outside, from somewhere behind the figure, another voice called my name. Ewan's voice. I turned. He was standing at the edge of the trees beside the recreated crash scene, one hand resting against a trunk, face unreadable in the headlight spill. Not smiling, not afraid, listening the way I'd seen him listen before. His eyes met mine, and I couldn't tell whether he was pleading or warning. "Don't let it take your voice too," he said. The dead man didn't turn toward him, didn't seem to hear him at all. I looked back and forth between them, and there it was, the real center of the choice. Not whether to stop or drive, too late for that, whether to stay in the scene and keep answering, keep feeding this thing intimacy until it wore me hollow, or break the pattern by leaving with the truth said aloud but not surrendered whole. I don't know if there was a correct answer. I only know the one I chose. I put the truck in gear. The dead man's expression changed for the first time. Not anger, disappointment. That was worse. The engine pulled. The truck crept forward. He stayed where he was until the bumper nearly touched him. Then he stepped aside with calm courtesy, like a man making room on a narrow road. As I passed, he lifted one hand and laid it flat against the driver's door. I felt the touch through the metal. Cold, wet, It real enough that I jerked away from it. Then I was through. The ruined car, the broken rail, the impossible pass, all folded behind me into darkness so fast it made my stomach twist. The road ahead dipped, straightened, opened. A sign I recognized from the actual county route flashed by on the right, mud-spattered and ordinary as dirt. Mile marker 43. I barked a laugh that sounded half insane. Clear. I was clear. The night air through the vents changed. Cooler. Thinner. I could hear insects again, faint and distant. The pressure in the cab eased enough that I realized how tightly I'd been hunched over the wheel. My shoulders ached. My jaw hurt. Every inch of me felt used up. The CB stayed silent. No repeating markers, no figures, no second tracks beside mine. The road began the long descent toward the yard, a familiar in all the comforting ways it hadn't been for hours. I passed a shuttered bait shop, an abandoned gas station with one pump removed, the narrow bridge over the creek where the planks always thunked under loaded tires. Each landmark landed like a hand on my back, steadying me. I was out. That's what I believed. By the time the first wash of dawn started turning the clouds from black to iron gray, I could see the valley below. The logging yard lights were still on, pale in the thinning dark. I rolled through the gate a little before shift change, tires crunching wet gravel, and for the first time since the road had taken hold of me, I felt something close to relief. Real relief this time. Deep enough to hurt. The yard smelled exactly as it should have, diesel, mud, sawdust, coffee somewhere nearby. No suffocating humidity. No impossible stillness. Men moved between stacks under the floodlights, ordinary as payroll. One of the loaders coughed to life. I saw Rufus come out of the office pulling on his jacket, and the sight of him nearly made my legs give out. I parked in the unloading lane and let the truck idle. Rufus approached the door, squinting up at me. Even through the glass, I could see him frown. "Coulter," he called. "You look like hell." I opened the door, and the morning air that hit my face was cool enough to sting. Honest air. I climbed down too fast and had to catch the mirror bracket to steady myself. Rufus studied me. "Where's your color gone?" I almost told him everything right there. Not the haunted road part, not yet. But the crash, the lie, the name, and the fact that the thing on that route had known me because there was something in me worth knowing. I think if he'd asked one more question in the right tone, I might have. Instead, he looked past me at the truck. "You made good time," he said. That should have been impossible. I had lost hours in those loops. Or thought I had. The sky said dawn. My body said dawn. Yet according to the yard clock over the office door, I was only a little late for the expected return. "Where's Ewan?" I asked. Rufus frowned harder. What about him? He was on the route. His truck was stopped out there. Rufus's expression didn't change, but something in him closed. "Ewan didn't clock in tonight." Cold moved through me so quietly I nearly missed it. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking." I stared at him. "I talked to him at the loading station." Rufus shook his head once. "Station's been single-staffed all week." The morning noises of the yard went thin and far away. The loader engine, men shouting, chain rattle from the unload line. All of it sounded muffled, like I was hearing it through snow. "Rufus." He stepped closer. "What happened out there?" Before I could answer, a faint metallic clink came from the trailer behind me. Just one. Rufus turned toward it. So did I. The load had not moved. The straps were taut. The logs sat as they'd sat since the station, but caught between two of them, half hidden in wet bark and dark sap, was a strip of blue cloth. Not tarp. Not rigging. Cloth. Rufus reached up, tugged it free, and held it in his thick fingers. A torn piece of jacket lining, dark blue with a reflective thread stitched through one edge. County road crew issue. Or something close enough to it that my stomach rolled over. He looked at me without speaking. I looked at the cloth and knew the touch on the driver's door had not been imagination. I climbed back into the cab because suddenly I couldn't bear being outside it. Because the seat still held my shape and the wheels still made sense under my hands. Because if I kept moving through familiar motions, maybe the other things wouldn't get room. Rufus was saying something through the open door, asking if I needed a medic maybe, asking whether I wanted him to call somebody. His voice felt distant. I reached for the ignition and turned the key. The engine died. For one beautiful second there was silence. Then the CB radio crackled. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a soft burst of static from the speaker by my right hand. I went still. Rufus heard it too. He leaned closer to the door. The voice that came through was the same one from the road. Perfect now. Close enough to be inside my mouth. "You're still on the road," Rufus said my name. I don't remember if he shouted it. I was staring through the windshield at the yard ahead. Men moving, forklift lights, dawn spreading pale over the ridge. Everything ordinary, everything wrong. Because beyond the open gate, where the access road met the county blacktop, I could see a white mile marker standing crooked in the gray morning. 27. It wasn't there before. I know how that sounds. I know what kind of story this becomes if you let it. Man with guilt hears voices, sees signs. It drags an old lie into a new shape because his mind finally found a way to punish him. Maybe that's all this is. Maybe the root broke something in me that was already cracked and the rest has been echo ever since. But I sold the house in Welch 3 months later after waking 4 nights in a row to the smell of wet bark in my bedroom. I stopped taking mountain passes after dark. I never answered the CB with my name again. And every time I park, whether it's at a yard, a gas pump, or my own gravel drive, I sit with my hand on the dead key and wait to hear if the chains behind me settle. Some nights they do. Some nights they don't.